Welcome to the Champions of Change podcast, where we celebrate the inspiring stories of Black male educators who are transforming schools and empowering the next generation. Each episode highlights their journeys, challenges, and triumphs as they break barriers, uplift communities, and redefine what it means to lead in education. Tune in to be inspired, informed, and motivated by the powerful voices of those making a positive impact where it matters most, in our classrooms and in our schools. And now your host, Dr. Sharon H. Porter. Welcome to another inspiring episode of Champion of Change podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon H. Porter, visionary of the book collaboration Champions of Change, Black male educators making a positive impact in schools. Today, we have an incredible guest who is shaping the future of social studies education and empowering educators to become agents of change. Joining us is Dr. Terrance Lewis, an assistant professor of social studies education at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Dr. Lewis earned his PhD at Auburn University, where his research focused on the teaching practices and beliefs of Black male social studies teachers in the American Dirty South. Beyond academia, he is a proud and active member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, where he continues to mentor and uplift young Black men. Today, we will be exploring his journey as an educator, the role of social studies in shaping critical thinkers, and how Black male educators can use pedagogy as a form of activism. We'll also discuss the challenges and opportunities in today's educational landscape and what it means to truly inspire the next generation. Dr. Lewis, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I am truly excited about this interview, just to go deeper into your work. I'm in awe of everything that you've accomplished in the last few years. Just really excited about that. So what inspired you to become an educator and specifically to focus on social studies?
Definitely. So I never thought I would be an educator. So I'm from a military family. My father is retired Army, and my mom worked civil service for her entire career. It was Fort Benning at the time, but now the name has since changed to Fort Moore. And Fort Moore is technically in Lumpkin County, but it's also in Muskogee County as well. But it's right outside of Columbus, Georgia, and it's the home of the infantry. There's a military installation there. And so my dad was stationed there, and he met my mom toward the tail end of his career. They got married, they had me, retired, and he just stayed there. And so I always thought that was going to be my route. So the military was a big part of my upbringing as a youth and an adolescent. And so we used to go to Fort Moore to buy groceries. We used to go to Fort Moore to go to the hospital. We used to go to Fort Moore to buy school clothes. So everything surrounded Fort Moore. And I love the military. Matter of fact, the first teddy bear I ever got was a teddy bear of an Army soldier. And so I always thought I wanted to join the military and follow my father's footsteps. And so fast forward to high school, I started to do that. I joined JROTC, which stands for the Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, when I was in high school, and I rose through the ranks of JROTC, starting from the rank of private, and ended up being the battalion commander of the high school battalion, which is the highest ranking official that a student cadet could achieve. And so I thought I was going to go to either the military academy or the Citadel in South Carolina, and that didn't come to fruition. So I ended up coming to the University of Alabama. And so when I got to the University of Alabama, I enrolled in JRTC. I only stayed one day. So after I found out that I had to get up extremely early, 4 o'clock, to go to PT, I was like, yeah, this just isn't for me. And so I had to do some soul searching. And so I was like, what was it about JRTC that really sparked my interest? And JRTC is largely a student-led course. And so cadets are responsible for taking attendance. They are responsible for teaching other cadets how to wear the uniform. They are responsible for teaching the cadets the different content associated with JRTC, such as the creed. And so I found out that it was actually those components that I liked more than the military aspect of the course. And all of those components align with teaching and with education. And so I changed my major to education my freshman year. Started off in biology. Found out that wasn't for me either. After I took my intro to biology course, but I love my history courses. So in college, and I went to the University of Alabama as an undergrad. That was the first time I ever saw history taught in that particular manner. It was just really engaging to kind of see the professor start with a thesis and then to tell the historical story and then to kind of wrap it up there at the end. And I was kind of used to no indictment to my former teachers. Death by PowerPoint model is what I call it, where you kind of just sit and look through a PowerPoint of slides for an hour and 30 minutes. So that was new to me, and I really enjoyed it. So I changed my major to secondary education, social sciences. And then at the time, I didn't realize how much that also aligned with JRTC because of the citizenship component. So I guess I was a social studies person since I started JRTC. But then I ran from that calling. So I changed my major to education, and then I changed it to history, pre-law, and I changed it back to education, and I changed it back to history and pre-law, and then I started mentoring at the local YMCA here in Tuscaloosa, the Benjamin Barnes YMCA, about 2 days a week. And that was just really fulfilling for me to see not only the students engaged, but also the parents engaged, and also to see the growth and development of the student. And so I changed my major that one last time, and I never looked back. And so I have a bachelor's degree in secondary education social studies, a master's degree in secondary education social studies, and then my doctorate degree is also in secondary education social studies. And so I also have a master's in ed leadership because I thought that would be my route, but I'm quite sure we'll probably talk about that a little later on.
First of all, I love your pivots. I love that you were able to assess the situation
That's
and
right.
make a different direction. That takes skill, by the way. So
Yes, ma'am.
that's awesome. Now, your research explores the teaching beliefs of Black male social studies teachers in the American Dirty
That's
South.
right. That's
Please
right.
expand on the American Dirty South and then tell us what drew you to this specific area of study.
Definitely. So the term "Dirty South" is largely inspired by a hip hop group that originated out of Atlanta, known as Goody Mob, and Goody Mob was a group of four black men who talked about and dissected their experiences as being black men within the South. And the South that they largely talked about was not the South that a lot of people are used to. A lot of people, when they think of the South, they think of the South as being charming and people being welcoming and people having hospitality. And there are certainly those components here within the South, but with in the 1990s in particular, that wasn't the case for a lot of black folks. And so Goody Mob talked about that. They talked about it starting with what happened with Rodney King and the Los Angeles race riots, and how that also mirrored some things that was going on within Atlanta regarding the Red Dog Unit and some other injustices. So the Dirty South that they talk about largely is full of racism and doesn't yield the same opportunities for black folks that it does white folks. And one of my dissertation participants said he used this phrase. He said, "It's funny, they say deep South and we say dirty South." And so, when we say dirty South, we're definitely reclaiming a part of the South that was largely it largely excluded a lot of Black folks and other folks of color. So that's how I frame the Dirty South, and then the teaching practices and the research component came into play with the injustices that we saw in 2020. And when I was writing my dissertation, all of these things kind of align. So Goody Mob talked about the Dirty South in 1995. I may or may not have been born in 1995, if you get what I'm saying. And then in 2020, we have everything that we saw with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and then I'm teaching. I'm a middle school teacher at this particular time, and I began thinking about how that mirrored what Goody Ma was speaking about. Was that 25 years prior? And so during 2020, we had COVID, and we shut down, and that was a lot for me. That was a lot for me. I was living by myself at the time, teaching in Columbus, and so I just had to essentially disconnect from everything, family included, and also some friends. And I just reflected about how I felt being a Black man in the South, as well as watching Ahmaud Arbery be killed on video. And I never could get myself to watch the George Floyd video, and I still haven't to this day. So I was thinking, I was like, I wonder how other Black men who also are teaching, given this socio-political context, are conceptualizing some of these things. Like, how are they thinking about their purpose in teaching, and how are they teaching given this particular context? And so that kind of led me to ask the question, what are the teaching beliefs and the teaching practices of Black men, those who particularly teach social studies, because I taught social studies in the American Dirty South, given the socio-political context that was being navigated not only with COVID, George Floyd, and Ahmaud, but now what we're seeing with the anti-DEI, anti-CRT ban. So how are other Black men thinking about teaching, their purposes of teaching, and how are they teaching given this particular context? And I'm very fortunate and blessed that two Black men were willing, openly, and transparently to study with me to answer those questions.
Wow. This is really, I can't wait to really dive into your research. And you sort of alluded to this in your last response, because you emphasize pedagogy as a form of activism.
Yeah.
Um, and can you share how Black male educators can use the social studies instruction, particularly to inspire social change?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just speak from the empirical data that I collected with my dissertation participants. So I asked them, I was like, how do you define activism? Because, different people have different conceptualizations of what activism is and what it isn't. And both of them said it's something that you do every day. Now, oftentimes we being people, we tend to silo, I think, what activism is. So we'll say activism is you protesting on the street after something, a negative has happened to a person or a thing or whatever. And some people might say activism is, and that is activism. I agree with that. And some people might say activism is you write into a state legislature about a bill that needs to be passed to ensure that kids are safe, or that people are safe, or that elderly people have what they need. And I think that's activism as well, but that's not necessarily every day. And so my dissertation participants said, activism is something you do every day. What are you doing every day to incite or influence some type of change for people? And they both saw teaching as a way to do that. And so, I said, well, tell me a little bit more about social studies in particular. And one of my dissertation participants, who goes by the pseudonym of Edward, he said, when you think about what's wrong in America, what's wrong in society, you don't think about math. You don't necessarily think about English. You don't necessarily think about science, you tend to think about things that have happened in the past and how what has happened in the past mirrors what was happening currently. It gives you a schema, if you will, to understand and put into perspective what's happening. And so, social studies in particular allows, I think, teachers to do that in greater depth than the other subjects. Now, I might be biased because I'm a social studies educator, but I think it does. So, just going back to the example that I just gave with Goody Mob. So, Goody Mob talked about in that particular song the Los Angeles race riots and the beatings of Rodney King. Well, that's a historical event, and so if we don't talk about history, then, or if we're not exposed to history or historical events, then Goody Mob might not have been able to put that line in the song. So being able to expose students to things that have happened in the past and relate it back to how they can understand what's happening currently, I think is something that social studies offers that the other subjects just simply don't.
I love it. And I want to stay on that path about historical and actually cultural narratives.
Definitely.
Um, how does social studies impact Black students' understanding of their own identity in those contexts?
Definitely. So that's also a good question. So when I was a PhD student at Auburn, right before I transitioned, I presented at a conference. It happens every year. It's sponsored through the University of Buffalo. A great friend and a great mentor, Dr. LeGarrette King, puts it on. And so I presented at that conference. It was still virtual at that time. This is 2021, given where we were in society regarding COVID. And this also goes to show that you never know who's watching you. And so I presented a primary source lesson on the Atlanta race riots because I had to teach that in middle school because I was an eighth grade teacher and that was part of the course of study. So I presented a lesson on that. And then a teacher emailed me. I put my contact information up after the presentation, emailed me, and they asked if they can have a conversation with me. And so I'm like, okay, this can go one or two ways. And so I was like, most definitely, I'm always down for a conversation. So this was also another Black man who at the time was teaching 11th grade history in Alabama. I won't say the school, but he was in Alabama, and he had just started an African American studies course. And so I was all down for that. So we agreed to essentially have some sessions to help build out a curriculum for students. And that question came up, your exact question. And I said, tell me more about the course, the demographics of the course, because this was a suburban school district. So the population of Black students and other students of color was extremely low. And he said majority of all the students are African American or students of color. And I was like, that's amazing, given the context of that particular school district. Then I followed up and asked the question. I said, well, how do you foresee the discourse surrounding anti-CRT and DEI impacting that course? And he said, honestly, I really, really think that it would have had there not been a waiting list for the course. So he said, not only did I start this particular African American Studies course, but there's also a waiting list for the course. So the students wanted access to this particular content. And so I'll say this, and then I'll answer your question. So I think students wanted that access, both Black and white, because African Americans and other Black histories are not well documented and included in the social studies curriculum. But the importance of that for Black students is that they get to see the true narrative that's oftentimes suppressed by how can I say this in a way? suppressed by whitewash narratives of history. So they get that full story. And so I think about the movement to formalize Black history with Carter G. Woodson in the early 1920s, and his key goal was to teach Black folks about their history, to instill a sense of pride that they oftentimes could not go and get within American society, but they can get it through education and through, at the time, schools that were for Black people. So I think that's why it was a waiting list for the course, but it's important for all students because it nuances the narrative of Black people and the role that Black people play within American society. And I think that's part of the contention that we have within American society now, is that students and young people in particular have so much access to so much information, that when they go back and they want to have discussions about it, parents are largely resistant, because we have excluded those stories for far too long.
That it makes me think of, because one of the reasons when I was titling the book, I wanted to make sure that most of the time when you hear about Black male educators, you go straight to Black male students. While you all have an impact, definitely, but I feel the impact is on all students.
That's right.
And so I wanted to be clear about that, because I truly believe, and this is from my experience, because all of the years as an educator and even thinking as a student, I can count Black males on one hand. Even as a principal currently, I think I have 2 Black male teachers now. I had one last year. My AP was Black. So I just feel the presence and
Right.
the impact, not just, it definitely amplifies with our Black male students, but I believe it permeates throughout the entire student population.
Definitely, and just to add to that, I was hoping that point came up, so I pulled up this particular report that I cited in my dissertation that was done with Donors Choose,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes, to your point, I think Black men are oftentimes siloed when it comes to education, and we are forced to take on this one size fits all role, and that oftentimes includes Black male students. But when it comes to all students, Black male educators, this is right from the report,
Mm.
spend the most time in most outside of class time with students than Latino teachers, other male teachers of color, and white male teachers. Black male teachers have more students socializing in their classroom
I
than
believe
any
that.
of the other male teachers. Black male teachers take on a disproportionate amount of work than
Wow.
their other counterparts. But what's the kicker here, and the most important thing, I think, and this goes back to your other question, is Black male educators reported that they wanted to become a teacher to teach a curriculum that affirms the racial and ethnic identities of students of color
Yes.
and all students,
Yes.
more so than the other male educators and the other demographics. So I
Absolutely.
think that's oftentimes not talked about enough as
Absolutely.
it relates to Black men and the service they provide within education.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Now, as a social studies teacher,
Mhm.
and thinking of social studies teachers currently in classrooms now, how can they incorporate culturally relevant pedagogy while navigating this current climate? I'm talking political and educational restrictions that are upon us right now.
Yeah, it's tough. I would definitely say, one, they had to be comfortable with implementing culturally responsive practices. I also say that they had to be trained, because I think we sometimes assume that identity equates to a particular ideology, and that's not necessarily the case.
Mm.
so they have to be trained. But I think to in order to navigate this particular context, they need to keep doing what they're doing until they're told to do something otherwise. So I know a lot of black men who both teach and coach, that they are really getting it done for students in the classroom and responding to the diverse needs of all students, be it the diversity of race, the diversity of learning different learning styles, that the diversity of genders. Like they're getting it done in the classroom. And so I would say just keep doing what you're doing until somebody tells you otherwise. And then if they come and tell you to do otherwise, you say okay, and you still do what you know is right. But I will also say to that point is I'm a history guy, and so I think we can take a lot of lessons from the work of Jarvis Givens here, in his book Fugitive Pedagogy. And I think we need to do a better job of creating more intentional and explicit cooperations between teachers and administrators, that is an understanding that, this is what I want you to do in the classroom. But, if we got to put on a show to show people that we're compliant with the law, or whatever that is, then we can definitely do that as well. But know that I'm here to support you, and I want you to meet the needs of students and do that in ways that are culturally responsive, regardless of what the law might dictate.
Absolutely. And I say, regardless of what you call it, you still teach um, in the way that needs to be delivered.
Right.
So, a label is a label.
That's right. That's right.
So, I definitely agree with that. Thank you for that. Now, you are currently an assistant professor at the University of Alabama. How are you preparing future educators or current educators to approach social studies with a justice oriented mindset?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually just talked with a colleague about this today. I think for me, in my capacity now as an assistant professor, it starts off with the content that I deliver and assign. And so I have my students to read the work and the research, both empirical research and more practical research of scholars of color in the field who are leading the way and ensuring that all students, but more in particular, students of color have what they need to be successful. So that hasn't the research shows that has not always been the case, especially within the field of social studies, where one because people of color have not really occupied the space of social studies teacher educator. Here in the last 10 years, we've seen an increase in the amount of social studies professors who identify as being of color. And so we've seen an increase in research that kind of reflect that. So one starts off with that, assigning texts from diverse scholars who are leading researchers on some of these issues and concerns and strategies. But then too, it comes down to modeling. And so I do a lot of modeling the strategies that I would hope the student teachers would implement in the classroom. One prime example I was speaking about today is I was modeling a strategy last semester in my methods course about how social studies teachers can incorporate oral histories in their social studies classrooms. And so there's a story here in Alabama that's close to the Mobile area that's not really talked about a lot, but it's a very important story. It's the story of the Clotilda, which the Clotilda was a ship. And this ship is one of the last documented ships to transport enslaved Africans to America and enslaved them. And this happened well after the ending of the transatlantic slave trade. So this was a crime that was committed, and I was able to get a descendant of one of those Africans who was transported from Africa to the Mobile area, is known as Africa Town. Is his great great grandfather and great great grandmother, and he came to the class virtually, and he talked about being a descendant of the enslaved African. And then he also talked about how that impact his family, and how it continues to impact his family. And so the goal of that was twofold. Like, one, I think oftentimes when we talk about things such as the Clotilda and Africa Town, there's this perception that we want someone to bear guilt for what has occurred, and that wasn't the objective of that particular activity. The objective was to see how we can incorporate oral histories in the classrooms for people who might say this isn't true or this never happened, when you're hearing it right from a descendant of one of the enslaved Africans from Africa. Um, but also what they are doing currently was documented by CNN, and the family of the enslaved and the family of the enslaver are now in discussions and having some reconciliation um, regarding what has occurred, and they are now at the table together talking about how we can repair harm. And so the biggest thing I wanted the students to see is this is a way that we can use a strategy to begin to talk about how we can move forward as a nation. Because I certainly believe and firmly believe that we cannot move forward until we go back and we talk about and uncover some of the ugly. And that was a model of that. Two families going to the table talking about the ugly so that we can talk about how we can repair the harm that was done. So that's one of the strategies that I try to model. So assigning text, modeling, but also staying up to date. So for me, within this particular capacity, I'm not necessarily directly close to the classroom where the true work is taking place. So I kind of have to find ways to insert myself um, to stay abreast of dynamic strategies and what might be needed to help push the social studies field forward.
Wow, I love it. Now, you've served as, I think, a wrestling coach. You were an official. Like, how have those athletics help you build relationship with students and actually reinforce
Yeah.
life lessons? Because I really think sports is the key to that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked it. It's really important, and I think the research would show us now. I'm on a paper that should be coming out shortly with two scholars, both from the Clemson University, Kristen Duncan and Alice Chisholm, and we talked about that. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of education for social justice purposes is occurring outside of the classroom in spaces such as athletics and after school activities. But what we're also seeing is that athletics and other activities are being seen as less than by a lot of people within the academic setting. When I say academic setting, I'm talking about teachers that might teach your core subjects such as social studies, um, science, mathematics, English, and the idea that students ought to you're a student athlete, so you're a student first, which I do firmly believe in that, but I think that we have weaponized that in a way that it wasn't intended. And I do think that athletics is academic because it provides a space for students to learn skills that they don't learn in the classroom. And if you want to take this particular political climate, what they can't learn in the classroom. So it provides an extension for students in ways that the classroom just doesn't, given the political context. And then if you just want to take away the political context, just what teachers are forced to teach, given their standards, there's a lot to cover in a very small amount of time. So it's very important. And for people of color, black people in particular, black boys in particular, is paramount. I think to their development, um, especially as it relates to their social and emotional needs. And there is research now that shows and indicates that black men are using athletics as a space to further develop the civic identities of students in various ways, both in a way that's more collaborative. This is what you need to do for each other as being part of a team, and that's transferable when they become adults and they have neighbors, and neighbor might need a cup of sugar, or the neighbor might be elderly and might need somebody to go pick up his or her package from the street, or mail from the mailbox. Athletics teaches those skills in ways that the classroom can, but it's not necessarily utilized, if that makes sense, given some of the strategies that we employ in the classroom. So from that sense, but then also just from a citizenship lens, that you are out here to become better, and as citizens, that's something that we ought to strive to do, become better, not only for ourselves, but for someone else.
I absolutely love that perspective. I don't think I've heard it quite that way. That sports really is an extension of academics. I love that perspective. Love
Yeah,
it. So you are a fellow member of the Divine Nine as a
that's right.
member of Omega Psi Phi
Proud
fraternity.
member.
Yes. How has that membership experience
Yeah.
influenced your approach to mentorship and education?
Yeah, so Omega in particular, we have a international mandate that is geared toward fatherhood and mentoring. So now every chapter within Omega has to implement some type of programming related to fatherhood and mentoring. So I'm gonna stop there, and I'm gonna kind of go back and go to a historical sense. So Carnegie Woodson, the father of Black history, the formal Black History movement, is a member of Omega Psi Phi. Carnegie Woodson is deceased now, but he also leveraged the fraternity to help grow Black history into a movement. So every chapter of Omega in the early 1920s, 1930s had to do some type of Negro history recognition, as it related to the work of Carnegie Woodson, and that could be locally contextualized. So a lot of people highlighted principals, educators within their particular communities. But Omega was used as a vehicle to kind of, I would like to say, selfishly, to spark the formal Black History Month that we celebrate, and or could be celebrating to today. We can debate the extent to which we're celebrating that, given everything that's going on. But now, in a very similar fashion, Omega very recently passed the international mandate for fatherhood and mentoring, and so now we have to do some type of outreach as it relates to mentoring. But to go back to your question, the principles of Omega is really the guiding light and the roadmap to what we should be doing as mentors, from a manhood perspective. And manhood is something that's all encompassing. From what are your values, how are you treating your neighbor, scholarship. So how are you bettering yourself? And that could be both formal schooling, informal schooling, as I'm a real big fan of oral history. So even if you just go and talk to somebody that might be experiencing something that, or might have experienced something that you're experiencing, that's bettering yourself. Listening to podcasts, that's bettering yourself. So how are you fostering a sense of scholarship within your everyday life? Perseverance. How are you going to respond when things get tough? Because it's not a matter of if, but when, because things are going to get tough within society. It happens to everybody. Everybody is going to have their day in the sun and their day in the rain. It's coming. So how are you going to respond? Are you just going to fold your tent? Or are you going to kind of lean on some of your values and your scholarship to move forward? And then the last principle, uplift. So what are you doing to give back? Like, yeah, it's great that you have a podcast. It's great that you're a professor at the University of Alabama, but what are you doing to give back? Because that's the ultimate measure of any person is giving back. So just those principles alone are things that I know I draw upon, and I'm quite sure other members of Omega draw upon when not only fathering their children, but also mentoring and teaching. That's an area of research that is underexplored, and I guess I'm giving somebody a research topic. But the role of the Divine Nine in education, especially as it relates to the development of children, is very closely aligned, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely love it. Love it. So, what advice would you give to an inspiring Black male educator looking to make an impact in education in general?
Yeah, I think the first advice I would give is to do it. Um, oftentimes when we ask people for advice, they kind of go to well, I wouldn't do it this way, or I would think about this. I would just say, do it. That's the very first piece of advice. Education is a noble profession, and from a historical sense, like it was a profession that within the Black community was probably higher than some of your government officials. I would go as far as to say. And so I would say, if you want to embark on a career in education, you are embarking on a very noble, worthwhile, needed, important,
Mm.
fulfilling career. But another piece of advice I would probably give on the flip side of that, just to keep it short, is to know when it's time to transition to something else. Because once again, I think we sometimes get siloed when it comes to Black men and teaching, and also just teaching in general. And we think that can only occur in the classroom. But what you're doing right now with the podcast is educating. So maybe if you feel like the demand of the classroom and schooling, not education, schooling, has gotten too heavy, how can you use your skills, your position as an educator, to pivot the platform? Maybe that's radio, maybe that's a podcast, maybe that's you writing op-eds or editorials to the local magazine or local newspaper. So how are you still using those skills to educate? Because we can educate in more ways outside, or that it doesn't always have to be within the classroom. So I would say, one, to do it, and then essentially know when it's not making you happy anymore, because that's not good for anybody. That's not good for you. That's not good for your colleagues, and most importantly, it's not good for the students.
Wow. Great advice. Great advice. Now, your chapter in the book, Champions of Change, is entitled Blocking the Educational Stereotype Related to Black Men, a critical conversation with three Black men teacher coaches. What takeaways would you like readers to leave with after reading your chapter?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely like for them to take away um, the knowledge of the stereotype surrounding Black men within education, and oftentimes that's, we don't teach, that we only want to coach, and that when we do, if we can do, and if get promoted, that we can only serve as the AP of discipline. So those are the key takeaways that I would hope people would take away from the chapter. But then also, how can we change that? So if you are a principal, how can you ensure that you're getting the best out of your teacher that might identify as being a black man? He might not want to coach, but he might want to be the coach of the robotics club or the sponsor of the chess club. So that takes conversations. I think oftentimes the stereotype that I just referred to will cause us to assume. We would assume that all black men want to play this particular role, and that's just not the case. So I would hope principals would have conversations with their black male educators regarding what they like to do and how they want their skill set to be honored or fulfilled or recognized within the school building. For colleagues, I would want them to take away the fact that just because someone loves coming to my class doesn't mean that we're not learning, because that's oftentimes an association with black men and buys into the stereotype that we don't teach because people love or students love to come to our class. So don't get caught up to that in that. Come and ask us, why is it that he's so excited or is she so excited to come to your class, but they're not excited to come to mine? And then we can kind of have some conversations about what it is that you're doing and maybe some changes that you can consider to better engage your students. So that's also professional development. So seeing your black male teacher colleague as an opportunity to engage in some professional development for yourself. And then for my district leaders, I would like for them to take away the fact that black men can do more than discipline. And the black men that I know who are teaching are once again getting it done instructionally in the classroom, instructionally. And I would like to see that honored more in our administrative roles, because oftentimes black men get the AP of discipline role and they get stuck. And so I would like to see their instructional genius celebrated more in their school building leadership roles and district level leadership roles if they choose to go on to that particular level.
Wow. Dr. Lewis, this really has been an impactful episode. It truly has. I just thank you for being my guest on the podcast, as well as a contributing author
Yes, ma'am.
in the book Collaboration. And please take this time to share with viewers and listeners how they can connect with you. How can they learn more about your research?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not on really any social media platforms outside of LinkedIn, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on the University of Alabama web, and my LinkedIn is just my name, Terrance Lewis, comma PhD. You can also connect with me via email. My email is on the University of Alabama's website. Just look up the curriculum and instruction department, and you'll see my face. I'm the only black man in the department. So if you see a black man, you got the right one. So you can connect with me via email as well. And I look forward to any thoughts, challenges, continued conversations that anyone might have regarding not only the chapter, but anything that we discussed today.
I love it. And
Yes,
definitely
ma'am.
reach out to him should you want to purchase the book from Dr. Lewis, which will be available in just a few days. So,
Yes,
really
ma'am.
excited about that. And, guys, I want to thank you all for joining another episode of Champions of Change. This is where we celebrate the powerful voices and impactful work of Black male educators making a difference in our classrooms and in our schools, and also in our communities. Their dedication not only shapes young minds, but also inspires entire communities. If my guest's journey in education moved you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with others who need to hear it. Let's keep uplifting these champions and supporting the change they're leading in education. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep championing change. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for joining the Champions of Change podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us for a new episode every Tuesday, wherever you listen to your podcast.